Okay, we're back now, this time with cost management. You're going to like this because it shares a lot of the same tools and processes and thoughts with schedule management. So in large part, it's a review. When you come back to this, you ought to be able to look at this objective slide and go over these terms and concepts in your mind with some detail. Otherwise, there's a gap, and make sure you go back and study those areas. Now, here's your one-slide summary of everything we are integrating as project managers. In white, we are doing cost management. There are 3 planning processes and then just 1 control process. The thing about cost risk is that cost risk increases over time. It is much less riskier to cost management to find something wrong up front and to make that change while it's still early in the project. Your influence changes, in fact drops over time in being able to minimize the impact of cost risk. There are strong connections between cost and schedule, as I mentioned. Planning and cost management, planning, schedule, cost management, both have the same inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. Estimating durations and estimating costs, one for schedule, one for cost management, also have the same inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. And control schedule and control costs, wow, they do too, right? So notice there is this correlation between estimating schedule, also estimating costs, and later we will estimate resources. There is a strong correlation between them, and we will look at those later. I just wanted to point that out up front. So here we are. Notice the definition of cost management: to estimate, budget, and even finance. We don't think in project management very often that we might have to finance our project through selling bonds or some other activity. But it is true. So consider that in the definition, and then of course controlling it, right? First we'll do a rough order of magnitude estimate. That's just a rough WAG. Then we will figure our risk into our cost, called contingency reserves. We will fund and finance the project. If we didn't identify a risk, we may need to come back to the sponsor for management reserves. And we will control it by evaluating earned value management. All part of this. We'll study those here in this lesson. So remember life cycles? Well, now we talk life cycle costing, right? So we want to be prepared to ensure that we understand the project costs over the life cycle and over the life of the product. We've used the term once before called value analysis, sometimes called value engineering. And this is a way of figuring out how can we do how can we do the same work for less money without changing the scope? That's value analysis. Earned value analysis is a way of approaching earned value management. It's a way of analyzing scope, schedule, and cost together. So earned value analysis is going to lead you to earned value management as the actual tool to control the costs. So plan cost management has the same inputs, tools, and outputs of schedule management, except that we use the term cost, right? The output being the cost management plan. And so now we've taken that iron triangle, and instead of just doing the schedule baseline, scope baseline, and cost baseline, now we're actually using formulas, right? And we're using terms like, instead of costs, we'll use the term AC, actual cost. Instead of schedule, we'll use PV, or planned value, in the formulas. And instead of the word scope, we'll replace that with the formula variable earned value. That's the work actually done. Okay, but otherwise planning for both cost and schedule are the same. Then we want to estimate the costs. Again, it's the same in schedule management as estimating the durations for my schedule activities, right? And remember this, whether it's schedule or cost, better estimates ensure better control. That's why padding is always bad. So we have the inputs and our tools and techniques and our outputs. Notice the tools. Analogous estimating, we had that back in schedule management. Parametric, 3-point estimating, right? Bottom up. So these are common. No need to go over them again. You can read more in the PMBOK guide, read a Mulcahy's book on these slides, etc. If you remember in the tools, 3-point estimating came in 2 types. There was traditional or beta. Traditional or beta. So write those down, go back and review them if they don't come to mind. Your outputs, instead of schedule estimates, now you have cost, schedule durations, now you have cost estimates. You also want to write down the basis for that estimate, a clear and complete detail of how that decision was made. Those are 2 very important outputs, the cost estimates and the basis of those estimates. Okay. There are some advantages to analogous estimating. You can pause and review. And disadvantages. There are also advantages and disadvantages to bottom-up estimating, which is very thorough, but it takes a lot of time. You can pause and review those at your leisure. Now, other estimating considerations, right? You might want to consider a range of estimates as always possible, but keep that range small or you incur risk, right? Also be aware that your estimate could be called ROM, rough order of magnitude. You do a ROM estimate early on, but it's less accurate. Then you might do and in fact, these percentages must be known for the exam. So a ROM estimate is minus 25% to plus 75% accurate. A budget estimate is next in the early planning processes, and this is minus 10% to 25%. And the most accurate is called a definitive estimate, and that's considered minus 5% to plus 10% of your actual results. Okay. Then we estimate cost. We have terms like variable costs. These are costs that change with production, like supplies. Fixed costs don't change with production, like the rent on a facility. Direct costs are costs directly attributable to building that deliverable. And yet indirect costs, still important, are not directly contributing that deliverable, like overhead. Administrative assistance. Those are indirect costs on your project. You can, this is just an example of the types, the tools for estimating costs. They are nearly identical to schedule management, so no need to go over those again. When you see this slide, take the time, pause it, and it's a way of practicing using the formula. Remember, rough order of magnitude was minus 25% to plus 75%. So you can figure the math. And the definitive estimate was minus 5% to plus 10%. And this is a good exercise for that. Okay. Then we want to determine the budget, which is going to give us a couple of great outputs. One is the cost baseline. The other is the project funding requirements. That's the total funding, the cost baseline plus management reserves. So we have our inputs, our tools, and our outputs. Those are fairly self-explanatory, and you can get more information in the PMBOK guide 7.3.2.4. So the key is these outputs in the determined budget process. my cost baseline, my third and final baseline. Now I've completed the iron triangle. And I want to also have as an output my project funding requirements. Now here's what that looks like in a picture. So at the bottom is where we start. So I have my activity estimates, and I work them back up. Now this is called aggregation. Remember before we went from the scope statement into the work breakdown structure, we decomposed that to the work packages and further decomposed it to determine my activities. Now I'm talking about cost. So I'm going to aggregate up is the term used. This is cost aggregation. This time I start with my activities and add up the costs, roll them up into the work packages where I can add control accounts. It's a way to track the costs. I will add any contingency reserves. These are reserve money set aside for risks, both threats and opportunities. I can add my project estimates, and I get my baseline. That's what you, the project manager, will manage from number 5 down to 1. On top of that, I might have management reserves for risks I did not identify in advance. Those are called unknown unknowns. I didn't identify the risk, so I did not see it happening. So I went to my sponsor, justified it, and asked for more money. And when I add my cost baseline and my management reserves, then I get the project funding requirements, right? That's the overall project budget. And then the final process is to control costs, right? Remember, this is about the comparing the plan, which is the project management plan and the documents, versus the actual results, which I get in terms of work performance data. That's an output, if you recall, from integration management and the process called direct and manage project work. I will apply my tools of earned value analysis, and it has 3 pillars: plan value, or PV, earned value, or EV, and actual cost, or AC. Those become my variables going forward. Okay, and so my output of control costs are work performance information, cost forecasts, change requests, plan updates, and document updates. Exactly like schedule management. Control schedule, except for I had schedule forecasts there. Now I have cost forecasts, right? But otherwise it's exactly the same. Work performance information is an easy output whenever I'm in control. Because remember, my input was work performance data. Well, once I've analyzed it, I now have work performance information. Once I've analyzed it, if there's a problem, I will do change requests. If a change request is approved, I will update the project plan and the documents. So it's really quite simple. Final thought on control costs. Earned value management is going to be the tool you use to address cost performance on the project. And earned value analysis is a way of taking that information through these 3 variables. So your iron triangle, schedule baseline, cost baseline, and scope baseline, now turn into variables PV, AC, and EV. Plan value is the work to be done. Earned value is the work done. It's already in the record books. If I say I'm going to build a slab for a house, I can see the slab sitting there. I can walk it. And actual costs are the costs incurred. That's money I've already spent. Checks I've written. Costs incurred. And this is a 1-slide summary of the costs. You can find this in the PMBOK guide, table 7-1. Refer there. This is a summary of them, of that slide. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, we will come back in a few minutes to finish this up.